They shot one of the most famous opening shots in cinema history. A woman spinning on a green hill, sunlight catching her skirts, the mountains breathing behind her. It looks effortless, timeless, even a little magical. But that image hides a mess of blown hair, angry farmers, a cameraman strapped to a helicopter, and a crew that spent more time under tarps than in the sunshine. Welcome to the real story of the sound of music, the glittering triumph that, against a river of problems, somehow became a global phenomenon. This isn't just a list of movie trivia. It's a story of near misses and tiny miracles, of a casting choice that could have gone very differently, of a storm that soaked the set for days, of a kissing scene that made the leads laugh until they couldn't finish, and of little continuity errors. The sort of human slips that remind you a masterpiece is still made by people. So keep your eyes open. By the end, I'll point out the micro bloopers you won't unsee, and a few moments that prove the film's magic was at times manufactured. Let's start at the beginning. Casting. When someone first thought Maria, one name rose above the rest. Ernest Lehman, the screenwriter adapting Maria von Trapp's memoir, believed there was only one actress who could carry the part, Julie Andrews. At the time, Andrews wasn't the megastar we remember. She had stage chops, a sterling voice, and a spark on camera, but she wasn't yet the household name she soon became. Warner Brothers hadn't cast her in My Fair Lady. Some executives questioned whether she was photogenic enough for the screen. Then, along came Mary Poppins footage. Director Robert Wise saw it and reportedly said, "Let's sign her before someone else does." That decision would change everything. Julie Andrews' casting, however, was not the only possible path. Names like Doris Day, Grace Kelly, Shirley Jones, and Baxter, Angie Dickinson, and even Leslie Caron cropped up on early lists. Yet Andrews' warmth and instincts made her the heart of the film. Ironically, she didn't reap blockbuster pay. The deal she signed was for $225,000 with no profit participation. Later, after the success of Mary Poppins and other hits, she'd command far more. But in 1964, she took a role she believed needed a gentle hand, one that could balance sweetness with real emotional weight. Opposite her stood Captain George von Trapp, the rigid widower whose heart is thawed by music and love. Christopher Plummer's casting also almost didn't happen. He turned the role down multiple times. Plummer wasn't persuaded by a caricature of a strict naval officer. He wanted depth. He wanted a man who could be proud and funny, brusque but capable of tenderness. He wrote to Lehman and asked for changes for a more complex character and requested a chance to show the captain's emotional arc. Director Robert Wise and Lehman collaborated with him. Plummer insisted on a version of George that could grow and soften. That insistence paid off. His chemistry with Andrews and the subtle evolution of his performance helped make the love story believable. With the lead set, filming began, and reality started to complicate the picture. Anyone who remembers the sunny hills of Salzburg on screen would be forgiven for thinking the production had blessed weather. The truth is almost the opposite. Rain plagued the unit for days, turning roads to mud and making mountain access nearly impossible. So bad were conditions that heavy equipment and camera crews sometimes had to be hauled up by ox carts because jeeps couldn't make it. The Green Hill field that opens the movie? It started as a farmer's field, and the farmer, understandably, did not love being told not to cut his hay for weeks. By the time the crew returned to shoot, he'd mowed it down. The team had to reconstruct the look, import trees, and even dig a small brook to create the right landscape. The movie's bucolic perfection was quite literally crafted. The famous twirling shot of Maria, the one that's become shorthand for the film, was one of those manufactured miracles. To get it, a cameraman was strapped to a helicopter and flown toward Julie Andrews. The helicopter's downdraft flung her into the grass between takes. She coughed up dirt and hay in interviews about it for years. The noise from the chopper was so loud that choreographer Mark Bro had to hide in the bushes with a megaphone to cue Anderson for her timing. They did the take again and again 6 or 7 times until the perfect airborne freedom we now watch on repeat was achieved. If the mountain scenes were physically hard, The emotional moments introduced their own challenges. Christopher Plummer discovered that portions of his singing would be dubbed, blended with a professional vocalist's voice. For a classically trained actor who had worked to develop the character's emotional truth, the idea that his singing might be altered was humiliating. He hired voice coaches and took lessons, determined to make his own voice work. In the end, the final soundtrack is a blend. The choice nearly drove him off the project. Plummer later admitted that knowing his voice would be mixed undermined his performance at times. It's a vivid reminder of how studio choices, made for the sake of musical polish, can tangle with an actor's pride. Casting the children introduced its own drama. The part of Liesl, the eldest child, auditioned dozens of hopefuls. Names that passed through early consideration include Mia Farrow and Patty Duke. In the end, the role went to Charmian Carr, whose fresh, honest presence proved perfect. The child actors brought real-world problems. One girl, Deborah Turner, lost her front teeth during filming and needed prosthetic replacements. Nicholas Hammond, who played Friedrich, grew 6 inches over a 6-month shoot and briefly towered over older cast members, requiring creative staging and platforms to keep the frame consistent. There were also more dramatic moments. The boat on the lake scene, which looks playful on film, nearly became dangerous. Little Gretel, the youngest, could not swim. The sequence called for the children to tumble into the water. Production rehearsed carefully, but during one take, Julie Andrews was told to tip forward so she could reach Gretel. Andrews accidentally fell backward, and crew members had to rush in to rescue the child. If you watch closely in the finished film, there's a silent rescue in which Heather Menzies' Louisa helps pull Gretel to safety, a real moment of backstage bravery forever caught on camera. Then there are the small, humanizing human errors, the moments that crack the varnish and let the audience see the people behind the production. The infamous kiss between Maria and George, meant to be tender and slow, took more than a dozen attempts. Why? Because the huge arc lights used to simulate moonlight made a groaning sound. Every time those lights coughed or rasped, Andrews and Plummer burst into laughter. Their giggles derailed the scene. The director finally resorted to shooting much of it in relative darkness just to get usable footage. That laughter, though, feels true. You can almost imagine the relief when a take finally stuck. There were injuries, too. Charmian Carr, while filming the 16 going on 17 sequence, slipped and crashed through a plate glass window in the studio gazebo that had been built for filming. She hurt her ankle. Makeup and clever camera angles disguised the injury, but she spent the end of shooting limping through scenes in a way that only insiders knew. Continuity, the invisible glue that keeps movies coherent, also proved elusive. You'll notice tiny things if you look. In the classroom window sequence, Liesl appears on one side of the bed in one shot, and then in the middle in another. Camera angle changes, but the actor's position jumps inexplicably. After the lake tumble, the children's hair and wetness change from shot to shot, a sure sign the scene was shot in fragments. In the Vaughn Trapp family's hiding scene at the Abbey, the headstones that apparently shield them are actually flat against the church wall. No human could hide behind them. It's a small discrepancy that becomes oddly charming, as if the film, in trying to protect the family, forgot to protect the illusion. Sound errors slip through, too. When George taps Max on the cheek in one scene, we hear 3 taps on the soundtrack, though we see only 2. It's the kind of tiny mismatch that once noticed, you can't stop hearing. Then there are timeline artifacts, brand cues that don't belong. In the escape sequence's undercarriage shot, the tires seen are a style that wouldn't exist until years later. These are not cinematic crimes. They are the fingerprints of a production struggling with weather, schedules, and the enormous ambition of staging a sweeping period tale. Some scenes were simply cut, and those cuts speak to priorities. There was an extended sequence planned to show the captain and Maria thinking about each other separately, a mirrored montage designed to underscore emotional yearning. The director, Robert Wise, felt the sequence slowed the film and dropped it. Another small subplot involving a telegram and Liesl's encounter with Rolf was trimmed for pacing. These editorial choices shaped the narrative rhythm we know today. The film we watch is a more streamlined story because of those cuts. And yet, despite the setbacks, the film's human moments, unscripted, vulnerable, and sometimes messy, became part of what audiences loved. One fleeting, almost invisible cameo is a good example. The real Maria von Trapp, who inspired the story, appears for a blink during the I Have Confidence number, walking in the background with her daughter and granddaughter. They costumed her and placed her on set, but like almost everything on a long shoot, it took multiple takes. She didn't realize the repetition required a film. The cameo is tiny, but it's a poetic loop. The woman whose life inspired the story appears in the story's telling, briefly watching the dramatized version of her life unfold. The film's success, too, was not inevitable. When The Sound of Music opened in 1965, critics were mixed. Some were unimpressed by the sentimentality, but audiences embraced it. Within a month, it climbed to the top of the box office charts. Over the following years, it became one of the most financially successful films of the era, holding enormous staying power in theaters across the world, re-releases included. Part of that endurance is the songs, Rodgers and Hammerstein's melodies, amplified by Julie Andrews' voice, and part of it is the heart. Viewers connected with the themes of family, courage, and choice. They connected with a story that turns music itself into resistance against dark times. There's also a bittersweet epilogue to the story of Julie Andrews and the film she helped lift. Decades later, Andrews' voice would suffer damage during throat surgery, an operation intended to correct a problem that instead left her singing voice altered. She sued the doctors and settled in 2000. It's a reminder that the physical gifts we celebrate on screen are vulnerable and that the cost of a life in performance sometimes includes loss. Let's return to those little bloopers because they're fun and because they offer a particular kind of pleasure, knowing that nothing is perfect. In one early nursery scene, during My Favorite Things, Marta, supposed to be listening, gets caught mouthing along, singing a line she wasn't meant to vocalize. In another moment, Kurt's mouth remains open after the music stops, as if he's still mid-note. In the puppet show, Gretel runs to Max and begins her line, but Marta starts running too soon. She stops, waits, and then joins in properly. These are human errors, not technical failures. They're the reflexes of children who have become swept up in the joy of the moment. Watching those moments now, you see not a flawless machine but a living crew and cast.